his struggles at Indiana as perhaps the first dissertation in contemporary African.
We do have a section for that in 105 that's for Professor Jegede.
Which one?
No. I'm responding to...
Jegede speaks.
That's just a lecture.
It is a lecture?
Yeah.
I'm responding to a paper that was presented on the panel, in which it describes Dr. Jegede as a pioneer, contemporary. Because for me, actually, that's very startling. I mean, this is the first time I'm reflecting on that his dissertation is probably the very first.
Not probably, it is the first.
On contemporary Africa. And the kind of climate to which he wrote that dissertation.
And supervisor didn't know anything about the subject.
Exactly.
So what is there is even the civil supervisor.
Somebody asked me to go out.
Are you challenging his degrees?
Just make an observation.
What kind of atmosphere did you have to...
We take exceptions.
No, you haven't met Tony. Actually, I was going to respond by saying there were no difficulties. That was as far as I was going to get. But seriously, I think it is a mark of honor to have, and I'm saying this for many of us here who are professors now, to be able to allow your students to explore areas that you may have disagreements with, but you also may learn one or two things from. That to me is the respect that I would give any advisor, and certainly Roy Sieber is eminently deserving of that. When I got to Indiana, I was pretty much determined, to go into contemporary, and my pedigree would have dictated nothing other than that. Bear in mind that I had by then been writing reviews and criticisms on the pages of Daily Times, exhibition reviews, which are things I would love to see again. So by the time I got to Indiana, in addition to learning about the standard roads, of the traditional, which also has been a tremendous advantage for me, I, on my own, kind of, I had no difficulties in looking at what exactly I wanted to do. Of course, it was also with the advice and the foresight of Roy Sieber that he was able to point me in the directions of courses to take. With Louis Halls, Sarah Burns, and all of them who were in modern art. So that, in a way, was of tremendous assistance to me. And then in setting up your dissertation committee, he was one who was advised, and he was advised. Of course, you would be stupid enough, you'd be stupid to say no. Advised regarding who to consider as members of your dissertation committee. The difficulties came from the reactions of the populace generally, the collectors and all of those who had to do with contemporary art. It was like, what are you talking about? What is contemporary art? So that was essentially a difficult kind of period because you didn't, at least in this country, you didn't talk about contemporary art and Africa in the same sentence. These were two different things. If we're talking about Erebeji or any of these other things, sure, you would have people who would be willing to do that for you. So those are some of the difficulties. It was more a difficulty of the times, not of any particular person. And I think, it's a tribute to Roy Sieber and those who believe in his own philosophy that he allowed me to investigate the specifics of those problems and guided me. The thing about it is that you didn't have to know precisely what your student would do, but you knew where this thing was not going right. or what questions to ask, and how not to ask questions during field work.
Any other questions?
Do we have some minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Mine doesn't speak exactly to what was presented now, but it's all in the context of this conference. Do you see the artists that are practicing in Nigeria now as having a role in bringing about change in the country, given the fact that most of their patrons happen to be the people who are in power and who will not necessarily support such a change? And you can speak about the Nigerian artists based in Nigeria and the Nigerian artists based in the United States. Do you see a role for artists as pouring change, the needed change, the changes that we need in Nigeria?
Artists, politicians?
That question?
There's a question directed to Professor Jegede.
Yes.
But that was directed to Tony.
No, I think it's an important question, but not all artists work for patrons.
All artists focus.
Yeah, because you are linking patronage, corruption, and the limitation of what the outcome of what the artist.
Well, to survive on your art exclusively in Nigeria, you need those patrons.
But not all artists work with patrons.
Within the Nigerian context,
All of them do.
within the Nigerian
All the
context,
successful ones do.
all the successful ones, all those who are not employed by the establishment. You know, if you were not teaching, if you were not earning a pay,
Then you work
if you
with
wanted to be a studio artist,
Yeah, you have
you
to
were
sell.
out to make your money, howsoever, other than kidnapping. Okay, you would make that money. So
then you've answered this question.
They do exhibitions and get patrons to buy the ones.
And I think your question, in a way, examines the practice of art away from the traditional art for art's sake.
There was never such a
What
thing.
you have in Nigeria today, and this is just my personal submission, artists have so commercialized art. We don't, trust me, when I talk about artists or art being commercialized, what is important to the average Joe in the street? It's not about bringing or perhaps maintaining the integrity of art, as it were. It's purely about doing business, making money, and being able to live. Therefore, they remain at the mercy of the patrons, just like you have. Therefore, it becomes fairly difficult for artists to don on the cap, you know, like the one Jegede took upon himself when he was practicing in Nigeria. Wherefore, he was using art as an instrument, you understand, to checkmate the government, as it were. But you don't find too many of that.
Let me say one or two things, by the way, about the guy who just spoke. Those of you been to Nigeria, and I'm sure that those of you came from Nigeria, obviously must have seen the drummer on the way from the airport, welcoming Nigeria. That's the creator. And if you've been to Abba Macaulay statue there, that also is the creator. So Filani, before he came here, was quite huge on the scene. There are also hustlers. There are hustlers, and when we talk about Nigerian art, contemporary art, actually it's more, I would say 85%, if 90% Lagos. 90% Lagos. And that's where the money is, that's where the capital, that's where the banks are.
That's where the major collectors
That's
are.
where these things work. That's where the galleries now are beginning to develop in response to the market. And now you have Kavita's, Kavita Chelaram's
Auction.
auction house.
Art house.
Yeah, Austin Peters, Terraculture, and who knows what's going to come. And now you have BC Silvers. So there is quite a number of things happening. But if you want to really make the money, if you want to go the way of the politicians, you have to hustle. And there was a case, you might know him, of is it Effiong, who once proposed that the Archibong, excuse me, Archibong, who proposed that the major sculpture at the trade fair complex, you know, be torn down because it was going to do something, I don't know what was. He went on to actually buy, I understand,
Concession, he got a concession.
he got a concession for the Tafawa Balewa Square. He was really there. And he was until his premature death.
Yeah.
Okay, also running after the purchase of the National Theatre in Nigeria. He started as an artist. So you have artists who will go to banks and have commissions. And you also have artists like Yusuf Grillo, whose murals are forever, you know, quite elevating, or Erabo Mopai, who decorated the frieze of the National Theatre till tomorrow.
Which has been ruined by having it.
So
you know,
patronage is quite essential. Patronage is essential if you want to thrive as an artist. But if you want to follow a path that allows you to produce for yourself, which I think is the ideal thing any artist really would want to do, to produce to satisfy yourself. If people buy it in the process, you are happy. If you want to follow that path, the best thing is to have a wife who is working
and a good job as a teacher, which explains all your administrative work.
So, Prof, the follow of them will be, what is the role of the diaspora artist or diaspora arts historians, as we have in this room, to promote those people who know their craft, but who, for lack of exposure and having to rely on the patrons in Nigeria, do poor quality work because they have to.
Let me respond by citing one example. In Nigeria today, I think he's doing phenomenal work. Jalili Atiku, who is charting a new path, one that really is not dependent, in my own opinion, on somebody buying, because it is performance art. It is installations, that kind of stuff in the real sense, and one that then comes back the full cycle to the state of the nation in terms of having structures, which will respond to your question, having structures in place that would allow ultimately artists to write for grants, you know, and pursue items or areas of interest to them without having to bother about would they like this or not. There is a national endowment that has been on the table for God knows how long.
A large part of it has been embezzled.
Yes.
It's
not even been implemented. And yet you have some members of the establishment who have, I understand, millions of dollars in their own accounts, you know, who are supposed to be civil servants. I guess they're no longer civil.
Or servants, whatever.
They're both servants. So that would be it.
All right, we're still on time, sir. Any other questions? Yes.
No, it's just a quick contribution from the other side that fine artists are actually fortunate in the Nigerian context partly because of the art historians who have continued to write about them, and also because of those private collectors. I do not subscribe to the fact that because of those collectors that they have completely submitted their integrity, you know, in the course of their social responsibility. I think that it's possible that you serve those gods in order to serve your God. And I'm just speaking. When we come to the theater, which is, you know, my own experience, the theater has never had the same good fortune of private, you know, funding. It's always been dependent on government. And as a result of that, the theater, for a long time, was completely nonconformist and was just, you know, against government, against the ills of the society. What the uncivilized civil servants have done is to keep the theater people making their noise, and they've now gone in search of the minstrelsy of Caribbean carnivals in place of actual theater. So on both sides, the theater people have lost because the people have not been responsive, and so there's a stalemate. I would subscribe that we do not go for absolutes. I mean, you begin to hear that I'm not an absolute, we don't go for absolutes, because I think that these artists here, though they have collectors, they are still in the business of educating and producing knowledge, which is part of the social activism that we should be looking at.
If I may use my prerogative as chair to point out a couple of things. Art has never survived without patronage. That's just been the basis of what we call art today is essentially the product of high culture, sponsored by high culture and the state, before it became a slapocracy. So we have to be
better to use kleptocracy. Yeah. It's the looting of the state. Not the slapping.
Not the slapping. Okay, plutocracy. All right. So that's something to bear in mind as we talk about this. Secondly, for you as a theater performer, you obviously know that the response to the destruction of patronage in Nigerian theater was, Nollywood, which has surprisingly done much better than most industries in promoting its own interests, while being extraordinarily prolific. So it's there, it's possible to do that. The third, sorry, yes, just a minute. The third thing is, the role of the art of the artist in the politics of the state. If you insist too much on it, it becomes a prescription, and prescriptions of that sort are terrible for art. It's what leads to bad poetry of the sort you have an abundance of. Artists are able to do different kinds of things. There are artists, like the professor said, who are interested in their own creativity. There are other artists who are interested in becoming financially, wealthy and sufficient. So this is not new. This has always been there. So we need to bear those points in mind as we have this discussion, because it's not an either-or proposition.
In fact, in one of your slides you showed a cartoon on Babangida.
Yeah.
And this was a part of my presentation that I skipped.
Because
there was an episode where we were in Germany on a tour with Professor Jegede, representing the country. We were invited there, and Babangida was visiting. I was his assistant director, and I remember that for night he was really concerned about this meeting, because we were to go receive him at the airport. And so we all filed waiting for our head of state. And when he got, it was, yes, and we're all cold. So they had some history before that encounter. That's Babangida and DJ. But when he got down, he was very eager to meet and stretched his hand, and there was a handshake. And he wanted to start talking about the cartoons.
Who was eager?
Babangida. To talk about the cartoons and all of that, like old friends. Professor Jegede immediately, shook the hand and said, please, I have people standing here waiting in the court. I think we should go ahead and do the handshake and get it done. He did not want to engage. What he did, what I was pointing out, is that he was a critique of the government, but he said to me that he was going to lead the group to meet him as the head of the country, that he deserved that respect, but nothing beyond that. So there was the professional retaining his integrity as an artist, but also being responsible as a citizen.
Mr. Ukpong, you had something to say.
Well,
sorry.
Agenda, yeah.
Agenda card. I didn't see.
I just wanted to, I had a quick question and an observation. Because I was thinking, and you just, part of what you said about Babangida now, I don't know if it makes my point, but I was wondering as I was listening about the patronage, don't patrons sometimes buy work very critical of themselves without, in other words, they're so bloated in their opinions of themselves that they'd rather have the criticism, right, as opposed to not having it. I don't know if Nigerian patrons buy work I imagine that they do, that it's critical of the Nigerian state and the 1%, right? That's the, I mean, I can't imagine that because certainly that's the case in the history of Western art. Sometimes people buy things very critical of themselves or their class, and then the question is why. But the other thing I was thinking about is the visual arts seem different, perhaps, I don't know, you guys can all correct me, but something like music, for example, right? Nenna, who some of you may or may not know, a young self-identified Nigerian hip-hop artist, was very vocal and became kind of globally popular because of the Occupy Lagos. Nenna, okay, Nenna. What's her name? Okay. Well, I'm too old to know her well, so I know English. Nenna something. Okay, Nenna. But I mean, she sells, right? And I guess the record company is behind her, but she's critical of the whole structure of the state as it is today. So I'm just sort of interested in those.
She doesn't sell in Nigeria.
Oh, she doesn't sell in Nigeria.
She doesn't sell.
She's not the band.
Okay, no, right. No, absolutely.
So that's it. Mr. Ukpong, please, I see you in the back.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm troubled by the comment that my friend made about the carnival being co-opted into a cultural landscape, and I'm so troubled, given the fact that we're in the age of so-called proliferation of indigenous Nigerian culture, and it's like a conflict to me in the face of one being in the age of the so-called age of proliferation of indigenous Nigerian culture. Why then would anybody co-opt a foreign culture in replacement of the supposedly people's culture, indigenous people's culture?
Yeah, that's the question. The carnivalesque is not foreign to local practice.
No. Well, the point I get from what the gentleman said there was that we are now promoting, because I do know that in Cross River, I mean, for example, we have this idea of an annual festival that is predominantly the carnival. Yeah. One would have expected that they would have their own local masquerades, in the procession before even they could add that. But what it is that we find there is that the carnival, that festival, is completely South American culture.
Caribbeanized.
Yes,
yeah, true.
totally Caribbeanized.
But in Ugep, it's traditional masquerade practices.
Yes.
In Enugu, there is a masquerade festival which has no carnival in it.
Exactly, that's exactly
so
my point.
There has to be an understanding, Africa, there's always been this great global flow of cultural practices. High life was, partly South American import. So all these have been there. That carnival, the thing with the carnival in the modern era in Cross River, which I know a little because somebody's published a couple of articles of it in my journal, is that it's been supported by the state at the expense of traditional, festivals that were there. When I was teaching in Akwa Ibom State University, you could still see Ekpe masquerades and
in the procession.
In procession and Mbokwo dancers and all that. This was in 1990. But with the new civilian administration, they've gone for systems of representation that could draw tourism.
At the expense of the indigenous
that's the problem with it. It is not that the carnival is foreign to African culture. It is the packaging and the substitution. The resources that should go into the development of it's co-opted, and there's a reason for that. It is for the personal pockets of the so-called administrators.
Yeah, there's contracts to be had.
And it also gives them access to, because they just need to have a foreign trip and they get the estacos, so they go all over the place.
Let me tell you something really shocking. I ran the Nollywood convention in this country for 5 years, and each year, at my own expense, I brought in Nollywood actors to Los Angeles to meet with Hollywood actors, and we were responsible for popularizing Nollywood to the American consciousness in terms of having partnering with Film Independent in LA that runs the LA Film Festival, and giving them programming in there. Now, we applied to the River State government to help us do an Hollywood convention in Nigeria that would bring some of these Hollywood people to Nigeria. The governor vetoed the plan. And then Film One, an American-based company, went and applied to them, to be a convention that brings American people there to do interaction with Nollywood. They gave them $2 million. And you heard at the beginning of these discussions that Guarantee Trust Bank is financing Tate Modern.
You can't get that from
So, Guarantee Trust Bank is financing Terra Cultures in Lagos. I know that much. But that's because Bolale, Austin Peters, he's got a personal relationship with the former director. So this is there is a fundamental problem there which we've not spoken a lot about here, which is this problem of neo-colonial thinking in the governmental and financial structuring of the country. So the institutions that should come into place, all these institutions, and that's why I intervened in the patronage discussion, all these institutions require significant financial patronage, which is given for several kinds of reasons. The richest cultural institution in this country is the Getty Museum. They're sitting on a $9 billion endowment. That's billion as in B. So, not Naira. So, we are a long way from stuff like that in any part of Africa.
And those institutions in Nigeria were first defined and structured from conferences and sessions like this. The brain thrust of artists and scholars in the arts. And then once the institutions were set up, the civil servants, politicians,
hijack it,
and then mess them up.
It's the prerogative of the state, that's nothing you can do about.
I brought one official of government, a high ranking, to my university, and after 4 days, we then start to discuss what next and things. And I was coming up with all these things, and he listened and said, this was in my living room, and he said, we are friends. And the minister that you want me to talk to has already heard everything you've said. I said, how come? He said, the minister had been sitting in that chair all along. So the minister, in my living room, said it was part of the dinner and everything. I said, no, that's not. He said, because before I could get the approval to come here, I had to, go into a deal with the minister that he would also be traveling with me. Now he's in his village, but he's here with us because of the Estaco.
Yeah. The phantom minister.
Yeah, but the actuality is the
okay.
So those are the problems that we deal with.
All right. Sorry, Victor.
Okay.
Sorry, Victor.
Sorry, guys. If I may go back to the
topic of discussion.
Leave
Nigerian corruption out
about patronage and the artists and so on.
That's patronage.
I was privileged to have also worked at the Daily Times, for which Dele Jegede was one of the pioneer cartoonists, and we did similar things, making daily cartoons and illustrations in the pages of the newspaper. And I remember I came in at the time when Dr. Yemi Ogunbi was the managing director, and he set up a special studio for Yomi Ola, myself, Wale Lagunju, Kayode Tejumala, because we were just graduated from IFE, and fresh young graduates, we had a different idea from Josie Ajiboye's style of newspaper, and he wanted to create a different kind of newspaper. He brought in even writers like Afamake and so on, very prolific writers from fresh out of school. And so that Daily Channel was started, and it became very, very, it did very well from what I could hear from people. And what happened in the studio that we were in was that he just gave us free rein to do whatever cartoons we wanted to do, and had our own interpretation of how we reacted to the news, because we were given scripts to read at to do the illustrations, and we responded to the news as the way we wanted to respond to. But exuberance to do all of these things, you know that at some point there's some certain cartoons that came back and said, we can't publish it. Because never forget, you're in Daily Times. The government owns
self-censorship by the editors.
And there's some cartoons that went out sometimes, and from my recollection, some of them didn't sit well with the politicians. I remember coming to work one afternoon, I heard that Woodman Shodibe was picked up by the SSS people came and picked up Woodman Shodibe. Because he did a story about that Governor Ted Ola did not find very complimentary.
And that was even very severe.
You know, and then I was shaking in my boots because I did the illustration. Because I did the illustration for that particular weekend pullout. So, you know, in terms of people, artists doing something, it's not that artists are not there who are critical of the government. Definitely some of my cartoons were. And when I go back home and I sit in my studio and do the kind of art that I wanted to do. But I guess fortunately I sort of escaped. I never got caught or anything like that. But there were other artists that, you know, it goes back and forth. Sometimes you don't want to be so out front. Or sometimes maybe the exterminators are so art illiterate that they don't really want to bother with you because some of the cartoons are really, really strong. I'm talking even the caricatures that we made. I used to really enjoy making caricatures of politicians.
It's not always funny on their part.
And it's probably not, from what I heard, the fact that Yemi Ogumbi, that his tenure was resolved was not unconnected to the radicalism that came out of his tenure so
the Yemi Ogumbi episode was something that also was a kind of political battle between him and Akinyele, who was the Minister of Information at that time. They were at loggerheads. Yemi and Akinyele were at loggerheads, and with Ihomo as the Vice President. Yeah, I saw Yemi, and I said, Yemi, what is going on the campus? You know that. He said, Madam Olawole, and that they were going to get it resolved. He was going to be, you know, kind of brought back because he also was very close to Babangida. I mean, you probably heard the story of Babangida settling the problem with him and his wife and the girlfriend who had a baby in London. But that's
this is too far from our topic. Salah, you have a...
patronage. That's patronage.
Did you have your hand up? Who was it?
Patronage. Maybe that is.
It's interesting because I think the first time I traveled to Nigeria, it reminded me of Brazil. There's a lot of, let's put it this way, magic and realism.
Yeah, a lot of Brazilians are from Nigeria.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
I was just going to address your question when you talked about artists whose, you know, maybe the word push the envelope, they could be involved, engaged in activities that are actually critical of the mainstream or the institutions, but then yet they can be still collected by collectors and so forth. But there will always be artists who push the envelope. But the process, you know, of course, patronage, survival, all of those things play into it. But it's also the structure of the art world, especially the contemporary. It depends on certain institutions, the gallery, the museum, the art reviews, the New York, you know, Friday issue. All of these things are very important.
The hedge fund collectors, you have to mention that.
So these are all playing, but then there are artists actually, interestingly, they play with this, even in their own practice. You take, for example, somebody like Fred Wilson, whose practice actually depends on critiquing institutions like such as the museum. I don't know if you're familiar with his, Fred Wilson, there was a book produced in a project that's called, he did it, you know, with the Baltimore Historical Society. It's called Mining the Museum. Shortly after that project, several mainstream institutions, in fact, invited him to critique their collection.
He came to our institution.
And so he did project with the Seattle Museum and so forth. So his career that began as a, you know, pushing the envelope, critiquing institutions and so forth, somewhat gradually been co-opted by the institution in finding, something interesting about the practice. But of course, in the process, there is a lot of change happening in museum practice, which is what is valuable about the work, is that the work forces the institution to think inwardly. And the other example is David Hammons, who is a very well-known African-American artist. I mean, his whole case is even about defining the market, defining the galleries. But when you really get to the bottom of the art market, he's one of the most expensive artists. And he's actually proud of it, because that was his critique of the, based on that idea, is that how can he define the market? How can he get the same prices for his work like any other, white mainstream artist?
Is it possible that it's possible that because it's in the Western Hemisphere, because I think here people will take criticisms on a lighter note than probably they would take it in Nigeria. Do you think the context?
No, the other way around. I don't think so. I don't think that's an issue.
Well, there will be artists. I mean, even in this country, there's censorship. There are people who go to prison. There are artwork that I can never dream would be shown in this country.
The son of 277. The son of 277. I can't remember his name.
Yeah. He went to the Congress to do a performance piece. This was after 9/11, and he went to cast benediction on the grounds of the Congress, and they locked him up. So I tried to explain to his mother. I tried to explain to his mother that performance art is really something that's tied to the politics of white privilege. If you're a black person and you're doing performance art, you're putting your life at risk. So anyway,
he has a cousin. Not God cousin. As a Nigerian musician, who's had a song called Nigeria Jaga Jaga. And Jaga Jaga just translates into Jaga Jaga. And he was invited to perform for politicians. And Obasanjo was there as the guest, and he sang. And Obasanjo, the patron, stood up, took the microphone from him, and responded, "Bye-bye, Jaga Jaga." And he was exiled instantly.
He was exiled. They sugar buddy, man. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is very important. This is the end of the